Hello, future design legends. You've just witnessed a masterpiece of architecture and design unfold before your eyes. But before you go sketching your next big idea, let's get extra cheesy for a moment. Hit that like button if this video blueprinted its way into your heart. Share this vid like you're passing along the ultimate design inspiration to your fellow creatives. Spread the vision. And if you're new here, subscribe, you brilliant first-timer. Let's build this community into a skyscraper of creativity together. Oh, and drop a comment. Tell me your thoughts, your favorite architectural style, or what design trend you're obsessed with right now. Brutalism? Mid-century modern? Let's debate. Your support is the foundation that keeps this channel standing tall. Let's design a future full of inspiration, innovation, and cheesy puns. Click, share, subscribe, do it all. And remember, you're the Frank Lloyd Wright of your own life. Stay inspired, stay iconic.
How do you inhabit beauty? The question, perhaps too general if not vague, at least is not unfair since it refers to the fact that often the anxiety caused to us by our concern to do right for the owner, for the planning authorities, for the contractors conceals the implied imperative form of the question, how must we inhabit beauty? The implication being that it is not enough to do merely the right but what befits the situation, what is proper with an ethical component. Even so, what is appropriate when we plan to inhabit beauty in the landscape? And here lies the dilemma. Nature, by its nature, is beautiful by birth. This is what the country house in Tinos is aimed at, the pleasure of habitation discreetly weaving itself into the sensitive Cycladic landscape. The property is located on a steep slope in the southern part of Tinos, east of the settlement of Diochoria. With the mountain at its back, it has an unobstructed view of Hora and the port to the south, and the islands of Syros, Mykonos, Rhenia, Delos, Naxos, Paros, and Sifnos in the middle of the sea. The basic compositional gestures are that on the one hand, the body of the house nestles deep into the earth to its back, while, on the other hand, the view the immense blue of the sea and the sky tears the ground in front of it, like a scalpel, reversing the direction of the gaze, and thus, the view reversed, becomes a face. The only element that brings the interior of the house out into the light is the long canopy, an extension of the ceiling of the living space that runs along the entire length of the residence and, by protruding from the earth, marks its existence. To its back, a continuation of the slope, stand the walls of stone, earth of the earth in a vertical assembly. The house exists as a slot in the hill. Courtyards, sculpted into the body of the house, bring the sun and the sky inside and contribute to protection from the almost permanent northwest wind, thus allowing the unhindered enjoyment of the Cycladic climate. The sun, however, is also filtered by the pergolas, where the intense shadows in their continuity are an expression of the architectural simplicity of the house. At the same time, the courtyards function as relational joints that expand the interior spaces and offer different living experiences. Unique projection from the quiet face of the house, a small ground floor volume, the first view, and a metaphor of the residence. There, all materials of the metaphor meet the gaze, such as the pattern of the dovecotes, scattered among the typical houses of Tinos, with Chora in the background. There is also a long, narrow pool which runs the full length of the house. There stands, as well, the door of the house. It is this very juxtaposition between the representative archetypal elements of the composition, which could also be seen as their coexistence, that constitutes in this space the experience of entry to this residence in the ground on the landscape, not only as a concept but as a function and as a sensation. This is where the movement, threading around, allows for the insertion of habitation into beauty, anew. Responding to the landscape, the design of this country house on Tinos engages with the question of what it means to inhabit beauty not only in terms of doing what is technically or formally right, but in responding appropriately and ethically to a landscape that is inherently beautiful. The project seeks to create a form of habitation that integrates discreetly and respectfully into the Cycladic terrain. Open views of the island, located on a steep southern slope east of the settlement of Choria, the site is oriented toward open views of Chora and the port, as well as the islands of Syros, Mykonos, Rhenia, Delos, Naxos, Paros, and Sifnos. A slim slot, the architectural strategy is twofold. On one hand, the residence nests deeply into the earth, while on the other, the endless blue of sea and sky cuts into the terrain before it, reversing the direction of the gaze, so that the view becomes a facade. The only element that reveals the interior is the elongated canopy, an extension of the ceiling of the main living area, which runs along the length of the house and, by protruding, signals its presence. As a slot on the hillside, the exterior stone walls appear as the backdrop to the canopy and as a continuation of the slope, emerging vertically from the ground. In this way, the house exists as a slot on the hillside. Courtyard spaces, interior courtyards, carved into the mass of the building, introduce light and sky into the home while shielding it from the persistent northwest winds. These courtyards also extend the living spaces outward and offer varied spatial experiences. Pergolas filter sunlight, casting deep shadows that contribute to the house's spatial clarity and simplicity. Contributing to a meaningful act, a small, ground floor volume in front of the residence with a pattern referencing the traditional dovecotes scattered throughout Tinos functions as the main entry point and frames the distant view of Chora. Beside it extends a long, narrow pool running along the facade. The coexistence of these archetypal elements shapes the experience of entering the house within the landscape not only as a spatial function but also as a meaningful and sensory act. The house, as a single slot on the hillside, together with the elements that form the entrance and appropriate the landscape, constitute creative contrasts that could also be seen as a harmonious fit, allowing the residents to be introduced into a renewed sense of beauty. you.